A team at MIT fed 1,000 years of economic, climate, and social data into a machine learning system in 2023. The algorithm identified patterns that humans missed: pandemics, financial collapses, and technological disruptions. Then it generated a prediction for 2026 that made the researchers consider not publishing their findings. The prediction wasn't vague, it was specific, data-driven, and according to the model, 87% probable. What the algorithm predicted matches patterns that preceded every major collapse in the last millennium. And we're currently in month 14 of a 24-month countdown. Here's what the machine learning system saw that humans didn't. The MIT research team wasn't looking for apocalyptic predictions. They were testing whether machine learning could identify historical patterns better than human historians. They fed the algorithm data from 1000 AD to 2020 AD, including economic indicators, climate records, population data, conflict frequency, technological adoption rates, and social stability metrics. The algorithm identified something researchers called convergence events. These are moments when multiple destabilizing factors align simultaneously. The pattern appears roughly every 80 years, with disturbing consistency. The algorithm found convergence events in 1348 during the Black Death, 1453 when Constantinople fell and the medieval period ended, 1618 at the start of the 30 Years' War, 1789 with the French Revolution, 1848 during the European revolutions, 1929 at the start of the Great Depression, and 2008 during the financial crisis. But here's what made the researchers panic. The algorithm predicted the next convergence event for late 2026. Not sometime in the future. Not within the next decade. Specifically Q4 2026. The model assigned it an 87% probability based on current trajectory of the input variables. The pattern works like this. Multiple systems under stress simultaneously reach breaking points within an 18-24-month window. No single factor causes collapse. It's the convergence of 6 or 7 critical failures happening at once that creates cascading effects no system can absorb. The algorithm identified 6 factors currently approaching critical thresholds. All 6 are projected to hit simultaneously between October 2026 and March 2027. The machine learning model analyzed 1,000 years of sovereign debt data. It identified a consistent pattern where total debt exceeding 250% of GDP creates systemic instability that triggers either default, hyperinflation, or economic collapse within 24 months. Global debt hit 256% of GDP in Q2 2023. That's the highest level in recorded history outside of world wars. U.S. national debt is $34 trillion against $27 trillion GDP. That's 126% debt to GDP ratio. China's total debt, including provincial and corporate debt, is 300% of GDP. Japan is at 264%. Europe averages 195%. But here's what the algorithm identified that economists miss. It's not just government debt. The model tracks total system debt, including corporate, household, and financial sector leverage. When combined debt across all sectors exceeds 250% of GDP, the mathematics of debt service becomes impossible. Interest payments consume economic growth. New debt is required just to service existing debt. The system becomes a Ponzi scheme requiring infinite growth to avoid collapse. The historical precedent is perfect. Every time total system debt crossed 250% of GDP in the dataset, collapse occurred within 36 months. Sometimes it was sovereign default, like Spain in 1557 and 1596. Sometimes it was currency collapse, like Weimar Germany in 1923. Sometimes it was deflationary depression, like the 1930s. The specific mechanism varies, but the outcome is consistent. The debt becomes mathematically unpayable. We crossed 250% in Q2 2023. The algorithm's 24-month window projects crisis between Q2 2025 and Q2 2027. That puts the peak probability in late 2026. We're already seeing the early indicators the model predicted. Central banks raised rates aggressively in 2022 to 2023, making debt service more expensive. Governments are borrowing to pay interest on existing debt. Corporate bankruptcies are increasing. The math is starting to break. The algorithm analyzed climate data going back to the medieval warm period. It identified that rapid temperature changes above 1.2 degrees Celsius within a century correlate with agricultural failures, population displacement, and social instability within 5–10 years of crossing the threshold. We crossed 1.2 degrees above pre-industrial levels in 2023. But here's what the model identified that climate scientists don't emphasize. It's not the average temperature that triggers crisis. It's the frequency of extreme events. The algorithm found that when extreme weather events double in frequency over a 10-year period, agricultural systems fail to adapt. Crop yields become unpredictable. Supply chains break. Food prices spike. Extreme weather events doubled between 2013 and 2023. Floods, droughts, hurricanes, wildfires, and heat waves are occurring twice as frequently as they did a decade ago. The algorithm predicts this acceleration continues through 2026, reaching a point where multiple breadbasket regions experience simultaneous crop failures. The historical pattern is brutal. The Little Ice Age in the 1600s caused crop failures that triggered the 30 Years' War, English Civil War, and global crisis. The algorithm identified temperature volatility as the trigger, not absolute temperature. We're currently experiencing volatility that matches the 1640s pattern. The model projects major agricultural disruption in 2025 to 2026, affecting wheat, rice, and corn production simultaneously. We're already seeing it start. India banned rice exports in 2023 due to drought. Ukraine's wheat production is down 30% due to war. The U.S. experienced drought affecting corn yields. The algorithm predicts they become simultaneous and compounding in 2026. This was the most surprising finding. The algorithm analyzed historical records of social cohesion, including riot frequency, political fragmentation, institutional trust metrics, and civil conflict. It identified a trust threshold below which societies fragment rapidly. The threshold is 30% institutional trust. When fewer than 30% of a population expresses trust in government, media, financial institutions, and courts simultaneously, the algorithm found that societies enter a phase of rapid destabilization. Cooperation breaks down. Political compromise becomes impossible. Violence increases. U.S. institutional trust hit 27% in 2023, according to Pew Research. Trust in government is at 16%. Trust in media is at 34%. Trust in financial institutions is at 29%. These are record lows. European numbers are similar. UK institutional trust is at 31%. France is at 28%. Germany is at 35%, but declining rapidly. But here's what makes this catastrophic. The algorithm found that once trust drops below 30%, it doesn't recover without a major external shock that forces unity, war, depression, or catastrophe. Absent that shock, trust continues declining until institutional collapse. We dropped below 30% in 2022. The model shows no recovery trajectory. Instead, it projects further decline through 2026. Historical precedent is consistent. The French Revolution occurred when institutional trust collapsed. The 1848 revolutions across Europe followed trust breakdown. The Weimar Republic fell when Germans lost faith in democratic institutions. The pattern is always the same. Trust erodes gradually, then collapses rapidly once it crosses the threshold. We crossed that threshold 18 months ago. The algorithm gives us until late 2026 before trust collapse triggers institutional failure. We're watching it happen in real time. Political polarization is increasing. Election denial is rising. Faith in institutions continues dropping. The model says this becomes irreversible in 2026. The machine learning system analyzed 1,000 years of resource conflict data, including water access, mineral availability, energy supply, and arable land. It identified that when three or more critical resources enter scarcity simultaneously, conflict probability increases by 400%. We're entering simultaneous scarcity in four resources. Freshwater availability is declining in regions supporting 2 billion people. Rare earth minerals essential for technology are concentrated in geopolitically unstable regions. Arable land is being lost to urbanization and climate effects. Energy transition is creating competition for lithium, cobalt, and copper. But here's the pattern the algorithm identified. Resource scarcity alone doesn't trigger conflict. What triggers conflict is the perception that resources are becoming zero-sum. When nations believe they must secure resources now or lose access forever, competition becomes existential. That perception shift happens rapidly once scarcity crosses critical thresholds. We're seeing the perception shift now. China is hoarding rare earth minerals and restricting exports. Countries are securing long-term lithium contracts at any price. Water rights disputes are intensifying. The algorithm identified this behavior as pre-conflict positioning identical to patterns preceding major resource wars in history. The model projects this reaches critical mass in 2026, not because resources actually run out, but because enough nations act as if they're running out. The resulting competition creates actual scarcity through hoarding, export restrictions, and supply chain disruption. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy that the algorithm says is already in motion. The algorithm analyzed every major technological disruption in history, from the printing press to the internet. It measured the gap between technology adoption and social adaptation. When the gap exceeds what the model calls adaptation capacity, social instability follows within 3-5 years. AI advancement in 2023 exceeded the adaptation gap threshold. The speed of AI capability improvement is faster than society's ability to adapt labor markets, education systems, regulatory frameworks, and social structures. The algorithm identified this pattern before. The Industrial Revolution created a 50-year adaptation crisis. The computer revolution created a 20-year adaptation crisis. The AI revolution is happening in 3-5 years. But here's what makes AI different. Previous technological disruptions replaced physical labor while creating new jobs in other sectors. AI disrupts cognitive labor with no obvious replacement sectors. The algorithm projects 30 to 40% of current jobs will be affected by 2027. Historical data shows that unemployment above 15% for cognitive workers creates political instability that democratic systems can't absorb. We're at 5% AI-related job displacement in 2024. The algorithm's exponential curve projects 15% by late 2025 and 30% by 2027. That's faster than any previous technological disruption, faster than the Industrial Revolution, faster than computerization. The model says society has no historical precedent for adapting this quickly. The prediction is specific. By Q4 2026, AI displacement reaches levels that trigger political crisis in developed nations. Not because AI is evil, but because the speed of change exceeds the speed of adaptation. The algorithm found this pattern before. Rapid technological change without social adaptation always creates instability. Always. The algorithm analyzed 1,000 years of pandemic data, including the Black Death, multiple smallpox outbreaks, cholera, Spanish flu, and COVID-19. It identified environmental and social conditions that increase pandemic probability. 6 of 7 high-risk factors are currently present. Global interconnection, zoonotic disease spillover increasing, antibiotic resistance rising, healthcare systems under stress, and misinformation degrading public health response. The only missing factor is a novel pathogen, which is by definition unpredictable. But here's what the algorithm predicts. Given current conditions, probability of a pandemic with severity equal to or greater than COVID-19 is 34% by 2027. That's not a high probability by itself. What makes it dangerous is the convergence. A pandemic hitting when debt systems are fragile, food systems are stressed, trust is collapsed, resources are scarce, and technology is disrupting employment would be catastrophic. COVID-19 hit when only 2 of 6 factors were critical. Debt was elevated, but manageable. Climate effects were present, but not severe. Trust was declining, but not collapsed. Resources were available. Technology disruption was moderate. We still experienced global crisis. The algorithm projects that a similar pandemic hitting in 2026 to 2027, when all 6 factors are critical, would be system-ending. The model doesn't predict a pandemic will happen. It predicts that if one happens, the convergence of other factors means recovery is impossible. The system has no resilience left. One additional shock breaks it completely. Here's how the algorithm projects the next 24 months. Debt service costs continue increasing as rates stay elevated. At least one major economy enters default or hyperinflation by Q2 2025. Climate-driven agricultural failures affect global food supply in growing season 2025. Food prices spike 40 to 60%. Social trust continues declining as institutions fail to address compounding crises. Political extremism increases. Resource competition becomes explicit. Nations begin securing critical supplies through coercion if necessary. AI job displacement crosses 15% in late 2025, triggering political crisis in multiple developed nations. By Q4 2026, all 6 factors reach critical simultaneously. The model doesn't predict how it ends. It predicts that between October 2026 and March 2027, the convergence of these 6 factors creates a systemic crisis that overwhelms institutional capacity to respond. What happens next depends on decisions made in that window. The algorithm can't predict human choices, only systemic pressures. But here's what the historical data shows. Every previous convergence event led to one of 3 outcomes: major war that resets systems through destruction, economic collapse that resets through depression and debt default, or revolutionary political change that resets through institutional upheaval. None of the historical outcomes are pleasant. All resulted in significant human suffering before new stable systems emerged. The MIT team delayed publication for 8 months after getting these results. They reran the analysis multiple times with different parameters. The prediction remained consistent. 87% probability of systemic crisis in Q4 2026 based on current trajectories. They finally published in January 2024 in a limited circulation journal with minimal media coverage. The reasoning was ethical uncertainty. Publishing apocalyptic predictions could become self-fulfilling. If people believe crisis is coming, they alter behavior in ways that guarantee crisis. Bank runs happen because people expect bank runs. Market crashes happen because people expect market crashes. But here's the counter-argument. The prediction is based on structural factors already in motion. Debt is already at 256% of GDP. Climate change is already accelerating. Trust is already below 30%. Resources are already becoming scarce. Technology is already disrupting employment. These aren't hypotheticals, they're current reality. The algorithm simply identified that these factors are approaching breaking points simultaneously. It's not predicting the future, it's measuring the present and extrapolating mathematically. When you're driving toward a cliff at 60 miles per hour, you don't need prophecy to predict what happens in 5 minutes. You need basic physics. The model gives 87% probability of systemic crisis. That's not certainty. That's high likelihood. What does systemic crisis mean? The algorithm defines it as simultaneous failure of three or more critical systems: financial, agricultural, political, or social systems experiencing breakdown at the same time. Historical analogs are the 1340s Black Death period, the 1640s global crisis, the 1780s revolutionary period, and the 1930s Great Depression. All featured multiple system failures simultaneously. All resulted in death, tolls ranging from 10 to 30% of affected populations through war, disease, and famine. All took 10 to 20 years to stabilize. The difference now is global interconnection. Previous crises were regional. Even the Great Depression affected primarily Western nations. A crisis now would be instantly global. Supply chains would break simultaneously everywhere. Financial contagion would spread in hours. Social unrest would cross borders through social media. The algorithm suggests global crisis now would be faster and more severe than any historical precedent. But it also suggests the crisis would be shorter. Historical crises lasted decades because information moved slowly and coordination was difficult. Modern communication and coordination could theoretically resolve crisis faster if institutions act decisively. That's the optimistic scenario the algorithm allows for. The algorithm gives 13% probability of avoiding crisis. That's not zero. What would it take? Dramatic coordinated policy changes across multiple nations simultaneously. Debt restructuring that's politically impossible, but mathematically necessary. Aggressive climate adaptation that's expensive but feasible. Institutional reforms that restore trust, international cooperation on resource allocation, managed technological transition with social safety nets. None of these are individually impossible. Together, coordinated globally, implemented rapidly, they could alter the trajectory. The 1998 Asian financial crisis could have triggered global collapse. Coordinated central bank action prevented it. The 2008 financial crisis could have been another Great Depression. Massive government intervention prevented it, but here's why the algorithm gives only 13% probability to this outcome. It requires political coordination that current trust levels make nearly impossible. It requires short-term sacrifice for long-term benefit, which democracies struggle with. It requires admitting current systems are failing, which incumbents resist. The structural barriers to coordination are higher now than during previous near misses. The math is simple. To avoid convergence crisis, we need coordinated global action on 6 simultaneous problems within 24 months. Historical data suggests we get coordinated action on one problem at a time, after crisis makes it unavoidable. The algorithm says we don't have time for sequential response. The problems converge before individual solutions can be implemented. An MIT machine learning algorithm analyzed a millennium of data and identified patterns humans missed. It found that we're in the early stages of a convergence event, matching patterns that preceded every major collapse in recorded history. It gave us a timeline. It specified the factors. It assigned probability to 87% for crisis by late 2026, 13% for avoiding it through coordinated action. The algorithm doesn't know if it's right. Machine learning identifies patterns in historical data and projects them forward. It can't account for unprecedented human responses or random events that change trajectories. It's not prophecy. It's probability based on pattern recognition. But here's what we do know. Every factor the algorithm identified is real and measurable. Debt is actually at 256% of GDP. Trust is actually below 30%. Climate effects are actually accelerating. Resources are actually becoming scarce. Technology is actually disrupting employment. These aren't hypothetical future problems. These are current realities that we're living through right now. The algorithm just connected dots that humans analyze separately. Economists study debt, Climate scientists study warming. Political scientists study trust. Technologists study AI. Nobody is studying how they all interact and converge. The machine learning system did, and it found that the interaction effects are what matter. The convergence is what creates crisis. We're in month 14 of what the algorithm projects as a 24-month countdown. That puts critical convergence between October 2026 and March 2027. The model could be wrong. Historical patterns might not repeat. Unprecedented coordination might save us. Random events might alter trajectory. Or the algorithm could be right. We have less time than anyone realizes to address problems that are already further along than most people understand. The pattern says crisis is coming. The data says it's closer than we think. And the mathematics says we're running out of time to change course. The machine doesn't care if we believe it. It just processes data and identifies patterns. The pattern it found is terrifying. And we're watching it unfold exactly on schedule.